In his collection of books called the Histories, Herodotus tells how King Darius gave some Greek citizens an up-close and personal look into how different cultures have different mourning rituals or funeral rules. When Darius was king, he summoned the Greeks who were with him and asked them what price would persuade them to eat their fathers' dead bodies. They answered there was no price for which they would do it. Then he summoned those Indians who are called Calations who eat their parents and asked them, the Greeks being present and understanding by interpretation what was said, what would make them willing to burn their fathers at death. The Indians cried aloud that he should not speak of so horrid an act. Gilbert Harman was a 20th century philosopher at Princeton who believed ethical or moral relativism is correct.
Moral relativism is the view that there's no single correct morality. There are all these different moralities.
To understand Harmon's version of moral relativism, let's consider the example of funeral rituals. Imagine that I show up at your grandmother's funeral and do something like the following.
Yes, I would like to say a few words. Thank you. Well, true confessions, when I came here today, I did not know Mary Higgins. But listening to your speeches, Margaret Higgins. But listening to your little impromptu speeches about her today has made me as big a fan as any of you, I think. I love her too. So that's good. And I thought as a tribute, I would try something. It's something I've had in mind for quite a few years, but never had the chance to do it. So let's give this a shot. Who's there? Canoe. Canoe who? Canoe come out of that coffin? I don't think you can if you're dead. Okay, let's try it. That wasn't so good, but let's try another one. Who's there? Freddie. Freddie or not? Freddie. I don't know, but I kind of messed that one up. But okay, here we go. I want to hold them in Texas like they do.
Yes, you would be furious. You'd think it was very morally wrong of me to bang on the coffin while doing knock-knock jokes and singing Poker Face at your grandmother's funeral. But at the same time, you would still admit that other cultures have different mourning rituals, different funeral rules than our culture. You would even admit that there could be space aliens on another planet with different rituals. Aliens who believe doing jokes and songs while banging on the coffin is the best way to respect the deceased. That's how Harmon thinks morality works. Our morality is true for us because we implicitly agree to it with other members of society. Just like we tacitly agree to respect a set of funeral rituals. But from this, it does not follow that our moral code is absolute or true for every culture in the world. That's because other cultures have implicitly consented to different moral codes than we have. So, for example, there's the case of U.S. Americans and the Inuit culture when it comes to adultery. Not cheating is a rule/ritual most Americans in serious relationships tacitly or even explicitly in marriage consent to. So adultery is morally wrong for Americans. But the early Inuit culture did not tacitly consent to a prohibition of sex outside of marriage. In fact, they tacitly consented to spouse sharing. So what we call adultery is morally permissible for them. Adultery is wrong for one culture, right for the other, and there is no absolute culturally independent fact of the matter about whether adultery is right or wrong. And the Greeks respect the dead by burning them, while the Calations respect the dead by eating them. Funeral rules. Harmon-style argument for moral relativism. P1. Breaking our own funeral rules is morally wrong for us, but not for another culture with different funeral rules. Premise 2. Our other moral principles, rules against harming others unnecessarily, for example, are like funeral rules. Just as we reach tacit consent regarding funeral rules, we also reach tacit consent about, to give a few examples, when killing is moral or immoral, proper sexual morality, and legitimate and illegitimate property rights.
How do you know how you should act at a funeral? Well, you go to funerals and you figure it out over time. But one thing's for certain, you would regard my behavior and speech at Mary Higgins' funeral to be morally wrong. If I came and did that at your grandmother's funeral, you would really be upset. You would think that I had done something truly morally despicable. I think you would.
Conclusion. Therefore, while breaking our own moral principles is morally wrong for us, it is not morally wrong for another culture with different moral principles. In other words, moral relativism is true. Here are two arguments for moral relativism Harmon himself gives. Harmon's appeal to science argument for moral relativism. Premise 1. The relativity of time and space spelled out in relativity theory is counterintuitive but true. Relativity theory notes, for example, that the passage of time can seem normal from one observational framework, but in slow motion from another. The length of a spaceship can appear unchanged to the person in the ship, but half-sized to an observer on Earth. Premise 2. Moral relativity is like relativity theory because it makes our moral observations relative to frameworks and is also counterintuitive. Within the Glippity-Gloppian culture's moral framework, torturing innocent kittens just for fun seems wholesome and good. But from our culture's moral framework, it seems evil and morally wrong. Conclusion, therefore, moral relativism is also probably true. Harmon's argument to the best explanation. Premise 1. Different cultures have different beliefs about right and wrong, and evidence and reasoning sometimes cannot produce consensus. Evidence and argument will usually not get consensus between a group that thinks abortion is morally wrong and a group that thinks it is morally permissible, for example. Premise 2. The best explanation of both the disagreement and the stalemate is that moral relativism is true. If there really were moral truths true for everyone, the disagreeing groups would reach consensus through means of evidence and logic. Conclusion, therefore moral relativism is probably true.
If one likes to believe in the power of music, but glittering guises and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. Invisible airwaves crackle with light, bursting with the energy. Emotional feedback on timeless wavelengths, all revives as our dream.